My husband and his buddies thought it'd be hilarious to leave me stranded in a quiet hill town in Italy after a heated argument. Let's see how she gets back, Ethan laughed as they drove off, vanishing down a winding road. I didn't go back. A month later, he tracked me down in a coastal Greek village. I was already rebuilding. Let's see how she gets back, Ethan laughed, his voice slicing through the dusk as he slammed the door. The taillights of our rental flickered away, swallowed by the narrow Cortona street, leaving only dust and the echoes of his friend's laughter. I stood frozen, mid-sentence, as our fight outside the rustic cafe dissolved into disbelief. He's coming back, I whispered, drawing glances from locals enjoying their dinners under patio lights. It's just a scare, but my stomach twisted, the minutes dragged. The sun dipped behind old stone rooftops in a town whose name I hadn't even pronounced right. Before I begin, I want to thank you for joining me. If you believe in stories where women rise from betrayal, subscribe. It's free, and it helps bring more voices like mine to light. Now witness how one woman transformed cruelty into freedom. I had only asked Ethan to ease up on the wine during lunch. His college friends, gathered for their yearly reunion, a trip I was reluctantly invited to, egged him on. When I suggested returning to our hotel, Kyle said, "She's always bossing you, man," while ordering another bottle. I stood to leave. Ethan followed, slurring but sharp. Old resentments boiled over. "Got your passport in that purse," he sneered, sliding into the car. "Then figure it out. You're so clever. Always telling me what to do." Night fell as the town's charm gave way to menace. I checked my cab. 87 to not enough for a train, barely for a room. My cards were with Ethan, who offered to hold them earlier. I found a low-cost pension above a bakery, single bed, a sink and stale air. The landlady spoke no English, but patted my shoulder gently. "He blocked me," I said to no one, staring at my phone. 27 calls, all dumped to voicemail. My text seen, ignored. I tried Kyle, then Daniel, every man in that car, all blocked. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't impulse, it was humiliation. Sleep came in pieces, broken by checks for replies and waves of panic. By dawn I convinced myself Ethan would return, guilty, defensive, blaming me for not taking a joke. I'd be furious, but relieved. We'd fly back to Boston, him the acclaimed architect, me the wife who'd shelved her design career to support him. But he didn't come. On day 2 I rationed my money, one panini for lunch, while scanning hotels and piazzas for our tour group. By night I realized they'd moved on to Florence. On day 3, a kind barista offered me espresso and pointed toward the police station. The officer there wasn't surprised, as if abandoned tourists were routine, but his English was limited, and I had no Italian. All I left with was a filed report and his kind eye. That afternoon, I made the hardest decision of my life. At a tiny pawn shop, I removed the 2-carat ring Ethan had given me on our 5th anniversary, upgraded from the simple band we once cherished. The shopkeeper's offer was low, but it bought me the next step. "Call America, family?" he asked, counting out bills. I nodded but silently formed another plan. Family meant shame, lectures about Ethan's temper, and the sympathetic faces of friends who once doubted him. At the bus station, the board displayed cities I'd only seen in magazines: Rome, Bari, Thessaloniki, ferries and buses that could take me anywhere Ethan wouldn't think to look. My thumb hovered over my father's contact. One call, and he'd send money. One call, and I'd return to a life where I had learned to shrink myself so Ethan could shine. A memory surfaced, Ethan laughing as he hid my portfolios after I mentioned picking up freelance work. "Why make it complicated?" he'd said. "We don't need the money." At the time I laughed with him, but in that grimy station, it hit me. It was another gate in the gilded cage he built. "Where to?" asked the ticket clerk, a soft-eyed woman who'd seen me staring at the schedule for 20 minutes. "Greece," I answered, the word finalizing a choice I hadn't known I'd made. The furthest coastal village possible. 14 hours later, I stepped off the final bus. My muscles ached from travel. The sea air hit my face as I looked around at whitewashed buildings and olive trees. My phone was dead. My stomach was empty. The enormity of what had happened, or maybe what I had done, settled on my shoulders like a lead coat. I stumbled toward what looked like the center of the village, dizzy with hunger, dread and a flicker of something else. Maybe, just maybe, liberation. 3 days of emotional whiplash had left me raw, cycling between rage at Ethan, fear of my uncertain future, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of something that felt dangerously like liberation. My remaining euros might have covered 2 nights in the cheapest guest house, but after that I had no plan, no friends, no Greek beyond a shaky please and thank you. And yet as I watched the sunset drench the Aegean in molten gold and soft rose, a stillness came over me, one I hadn't felt in years. Ethan had tried to teach me a lesson about dependence. Instead he had accidentally set me free. The Greek sun beat down relentlessly, as I wandered farther from the village. My feet blistered inside sandals meant for museums, not mountains. My water bottle had been empty for hours. Between the hunger, the heat and the emotional fatigue, the world began to sway. Silver-green trees bordered the dusty path. Olive groves I realized dimly, just before my knees buckled. The earth rose to meet me, but I barely felt the fall. Darkness crept in around the edges of my vision. A strange calm followed. Maybe this was how it ended, abandoned by my husband in one country, collapsing alone in another. I let my eyes close, finally surrendering. Hosmo, Kira, a woman's voice pierced the fog in my mind, followed by warm weathered hands gently turning me over. A face appeared, deep lines, gentle eyes, lips moving quickly in Greek. She patted my cheeks, offering me a canteen. The water brought me back enough to sit upright, though the world still spun wildly. Irene, she said slowly, tapping her chest. I mirrored her. She helped me to my feet, her frame small but surprisingly strong, pointing toward a stone farmhouse nestled among the groves. She made walking gestures with her fingers. I nodded, too weak to resist. The kitchen smelled of rosemary, simmering broth and years of love. She sat me at a weathered table and called out softly. A man appeared, a silver-mustached figure with sun-browned skin, wiping his hands on a cloth. Marco, she introduced, pointing. He nodded at me, cautious but kind. She handed me a glass of water, then a bowl of soup. The aroma hit my nose and made my stomach growl, loud and helpless. Irene smiled at the sound. That evening passed in a haze of mismatched words, hand gestures, and unspoken empathy. I tried to explain, my voice cracked, my eyes welled. They couldn't understand the details, but they didn't need to. They heard my pain. They gave me their spare room, a modest space with a whitewashed wall and a quilted bedspread. Too exhausted to argue, I sank into sleep like someone falling through water. Morning arrived with crowing roosters and the smell of fresh bread. At the foot of the bed I found clean clothes, an old but lovingly pressed cotton dress and cardigan. They hung loose on my frame but felt like grace. In the kitchen, Irene beamed and served coffee, bread, olive oil and honey. Now that I was alert, embarrassment set in. These strangers had clothed me, fed me and asked nothing in return. I needed to leave, to explain, to pay, to move on. I turned to my phone, now fully charged thanks to an adapter Marco had found in a drawer. Through the clunky translation app, I typed a message of thanks and my intent to return to the village. Irene read it and her face fell. She shook her head and pointed to the rain tapping at the window, then to my blistered feet. Stay, she said firmly, one of the few English words she knew. Rest. For the next 3 days I tried to leave more than once. Each time I was gently stopped. Once Irene intercepted me at the door with my purse in hand. Her expression, so pained, so tender, made guilt bloom in my chest. She took my hand and led me to a mantel above the fireplace. There she opened a small wooden box filled with old photographs. She pointed to a girl with her eyes and Marco's smile. Sophia, she whispered, then pointed far off, saying Australia, and mimed rocking a baby. She pointed to a newer grandbaby. She said in soft English, touching the image of a chubby-cheeked infant. No, see, and I understood. She wasn't clinging to me out of neediness, she saw in me a daughter, a fragment of love that had drifted far across ocean. Rather than feeling used, I felt a pang of grief for both of us. I nodded slowly and hung my purse back on the hook. Days settled into rhythm. Irene taught me how to gather eggs without startling the hens, how to hang laundry so the mountain wind kissed it dry. Marco taught me the difference between weeds and young parsley, though I yanked the wrong one at first. The work was gritty, physical. It was the complete opposite of my carefully curated life back in Boston. Gone were the boutique gyms, yoga studios and green smoothies. Here calluses formed. My thighs burned, my back ached, but every night the pain faded just a bit more. and every morning I felt a little stronger. More importantly, the constant mental cycling through my abandonment began to quiet, gradually replaced by simpler grounding concerns. The rhythm of farm tasks, the challenge of learning a new language, and the unfamiliar peace of honest physical work. At night I sat on the porch with Irene knitting beside me, Marco puffing gently on his pipe. In those quiet evenings under the stars and olive branches, I began to experience moments of true calm. The betrayal still throbbed like an old bruise, but here, surrounded by ancient trees and timeless routines, it no longer felt like the end of my story. It began to feel like a new chapter I hadn't seen come. 2 weeks after my arrival, as we sat shelling peas freshly picked from the garden, Irene studied my face, her expression unusually solemn. Then she asked slowly and carefully in her improving English, "Home? You want go home?" She mimed an airplane with her hand, then pointed gently in the direction of America. The question landed harder than I expected. Home? The word summoned the image of our sleek Boston brownstone designer furniture, marble countertops, curated perfection. But it also brought Ethan's shadow, his tight control over our money, his casual erosion of my friendships, his quiet dismissal of my ambitions. Tears slipped from my eyes before I could stop them. In halting, tear-choked English, I tried to explain. I told her of Ethan's betrayal, of the slow hollowing of myself to keep the peace, of the humiliation of being left like unwanted luggage in a foreign country. Irene reached across the shelling bowl, her weathered hand warm as it closed around mine. When I finished, she didn't say much. She simply pointed to her heart, then to the land around us, and finally to me. The message was clear: you have a place here. If you want it. Work? I said quietly, mimicking Marco's movements tending the olive trees. I stay. Irene's smile lit up her face like the morning sun over the Aegean. She squeezed my hand and returned to her peas, as if we had just decided on tomorrow's lunch, rather than the course of my new life. That moment marked the beginning of my education in olive farm. The next morning, while stars still blinked in the pre-dawn sky, Irene woke me gently and handed me a set of well-worn work clothes and sturdy boots that once belonged to Sophia. Still half asleep, I followed her and Marco out to the grove. The early light barely kissed the tops of the ancient trees. "Allays," Irene said, gesturing toward the low-hanging branches, laden with ripened olives. She showed me how to use a wooden rake to comb gently through the limbs, letting the olives fall into nets laid below. My first attempt sent more twigs and leaves raining down than olives. Marco gave a patient smile and helped guide my movements. By mid-morning my shoulders burned, and the skin on my palms had begun to blister. City soft hands pushed far past their comfort zone. "Boston lady hands," Irene teased with a grin, inspecting the damage. At lunch she disappeared into the house and returned with a jar of salve, herbal, homemade and fragrant with thyme and beeswax. She massaged it gently into my raw hands. "Tomorrow better," she said. And surprisingly, she was right. Each day brought improvement. My movements grew more efficient, my grip stronger. The piles of harvested olives grew higher. Then came the sorting. Under the shade of the pergola we sorted the olives by quality, perfect ones for premium oil, blemished for second grade, damaged for soap. Irene watched me like a hawk at first, correcting my mistakes with gentle taps and quiet nods. But as the days passed, her corrections faded. My eye improved. "You learn fast," Marco said one evening as we cleaned up the table, his English like my Greek slowly improving. It was the highest compliment he'd given me, and it lit something warm inside my chest. But my education didn't stop in the groves. It followed me into Irene's kitchen, a space that initially overwhelmed me with its rustic simplicity. Back in Boston I was a decent cook, magazine recipes, Pinterest boards, gourmet plating to impress Ethan's colleagues. But here Irene cooked with intuition and inherited wisdom. No timers, no gadgets, no fun. "Watch," she'd say, kneading dough with powerful hands, never measuring a single ingredient. I followed her, failing often. My first loaves came out of the wood-fired oven either doughy or burnt black. She broke them open anyway. "Try," she said. "Learning is not." In her world, imperfection was part of the process. Mistakes weren't hidden, they were expected. That alone was a revelation. Their food was nothing like what I was used to. Everything came from the land or someone nearby. Zucchini still warm from the sun, eggs laid that morning, goat cheese from the neighbor's herd. The flavors were earthy, fresh, real. All they needed were a drizzle of olive oil, a squeeze of lemon, and a pinch of salt. And my body changed. Gone was the designer silhouette sculpted by gym mirrors and boutique workouts. My clothes hung loose. My arms were lean, muscle replaced padding. My skin, no longer pampered by expensive creams, glowed from olive oil, soap, and honest sweat. One evening I looked into the mirror above the bathroom sink, and barely recognized the reflection. Tanned, stronger, not thinner exactly, but more. As my Greek grew, so did my conversations with Irene. One evening she brought out photo albums. She flipped through black and white snapshots of village dances, of her as a young woman smiling wide with a teacher's chalkboard behind her. I was shocked she had been a school teacher before marriage, she explained, shrugging. Then she looked at me, made a typing motion. You? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos before Ethan projects. My interior design work, the career he'd once mocked as just decoration. Irene studied the images closely, nodding with genuine interest. She pointed to a sunlit kitchen design and smiled. Beautiful, thinking, she said, tapping her temple. Her quiet validation brought tears to my eyes. Just those few words meant more than a decade of Ethan's silence. One rainy afternoon, she taught me to knit. I was terrible at it. Dropped stitches, twisted rows. But she just laughed, unraveled, and helped me try again. My first project, a lopsided scarf, was oddly shaped but wholly mine. I wore it like armor. After that came more. A clay mug Marco helped me shape. A woven basket I made with a neighbor. Each piece bore my clumsy fingerprints and my heart. They weren't just objects. They were proof that I was rebuilding one humble, imperfect piece at a time. After 3 months of working on the farm, without compensation beyond food and a warm place to sleep, Irene approached me one morning, Marco standing quietly at her side. They led me to a small stone outbuilding near the grove. Inside I saw the press they used to bottle their olive oil, the shelves lined with neatly stacked glass containers, their labels handwritten, the harvest arranged by batch. Irene pointed to the calendar tacked to the wall and tapped one square with excitement. Market day, she said with a grin. You come. The village market was alive with color and sound. Farmers and crafters filled the square, their tables bursting with produce, pottery, woven baskets, and herbs. Children darted between the stalls and the scent of fresh bread lingered in the air. We set up a modest wooden stand at the edge of the square. Irene and Marco arranged our olive oil bottles, soap bars, and preserved olives with careful pride. To my surprise, they positioned me at the front. Spew, Irene said, gesturing to the curious customers. Me, with my broken Greek and hesitant smile, was now our saleswoman. I stumbled through greetings and explanations. There were confused looks, a lot of hand gestures, and frequent laughter. But something amazing happened. They asked questions. And by the time the sun dipped low, we had sold nearly everything. As we packed up, Irene handed me a small envelope. Your part, she said simply. Fair work, fair pay. The sum inside was modest, maybe enough for a single fancy dinner back in Boston. But to me it was priceless. This wasn't allowance. This wasn't charity. This was independence, earned through labor. There were no strings, no manipulation, no guilt. Just an honest reward for honest effort. That night I placed the envelope under my pillow. I reached for it twice just to touch it, just to feel that it was real. In 10 years of marriage, Ethan had slowly taken control of our money, always with a smile, always just making things easier. He managed our accounts. He gave me credit cards, but I never saw the bill. Now, for the first time in years, I had money that belonged only to me. As I drifted to sleep, I realized something that startled me. I hadn't thought of Ethan at all that day. Not once. My mind had been filled with Greek verbs, olive sorting, the pride of connection. The grip he once had on my thoughts had loosened. A week later, Irene and Marco invited me to dinner at the taverna in the village square, a first since I'd arrived. Wearing a blouse borrowed from Irene's closet, I walked with them under the string lights hung between trees. Inside, the owner, Stavis, greeted them both with warm embraces. Then he turned to me with a curious smile. Our American, Irene announced proudly in Greek, a phrase I now understood well. Stavis led us to what was clearly their table, the one they always sat at. We dined on grilled fish, lemon potatoes, and local wine. Laughter rang around us. Partway through, Marco cleared his throat and leaned forward. Hannah, we want talk business, he said carefully, his English slow but intentional. My heart jumped. Had I done something wrong? Were they asking me to leave? But Irene reached for my hand and smiled reassuringly. We old, she said, tapping her chest and then Marco's. 68, 70. No children here. Sophia not come back. Marco's face fell slightly. We think retire. 2, maybe 3 years. He looked out toward the trees through the taverna window. But olive trees. He stretched his arm wide. 200 years old. Need young hands. My breath caught. He was saying they needed someone to continue. Irene's eyes crinkled with her smile. You learn fast. Work hard. We teach everything. Then she spread her hands, palms open. Business. Yours. The words stunned me. They had no obligation to me. I was a foreigner. A stranger who had collapsed in their grove just months before. And yet here they were, offering me a future I'd never dared to imagine. I don't know enough, I whispered. The trees, the oil, the business side. You learn, Marco said firmly. We teach. No rush. And just like that I was no longer just an extra pair of hands. I had become an apprentice, an heir, not by blood but by effort and care. Each morning Marco took me through different sections of the groves. He showed me how the soil changed the flavor of the olives, how to spot disease early, how to read the weather signs and when each batch should be harvested for the best oil. Irene shifted her focus too, bringing out ledgers, hand-drawn maps and spreadsheets their grandson had built years ago. She showed me how they tracked production and sales, noting which markets preferred which blends. It was functional, but old. I saw an opportunity. In the evenings I digitized their records. I created a color-coded inventory, sorted by grade, season and vendor. Look, I told Irene one night, showing her how the spreadsheet filtered patterns in sales by location. Her eyes lit up. Smart, she said, nodding proudly. Boston brain, good for village. With their trust I started updating our labels, adding tasting notes and recipe pairings. Drawn from my time in the kitchen with Irene, I designed a simple brochure with photos and our story, for curious tourists at the market. My Greek was still clumsy, but strong enough to hold conversations now. People beyond our circle began to notice. The pharmacist who filled Irene's prescriptions stopped by our stand regularly just to chat. The baker's wife invited me to her weekly coffee gathering with the other village women, a whirlwind of local gossip and rapid speech that I only half understood, but fully appreciated. And Stavis, the taverna owner, became a loyal partner. He began placing our premium oil on every table, with little cards bearing our new labels. Good for you, good for me, he said with a wink. Word spread. 2 more restaurants from nearby towns reached out, wanting to stock our oil. 6 months into my new life, I attended the baptism of the butcher's granddaughter, my first formal village celebration. Standing in the back of the tiny whitewashed chapel, I watched the ceremony unfold with a lump in my throat. The priest, elderly and gentle, noticed me as the crowd dispersed. He approached, switching to hesitant English learned decades earlier during seminary in Athens. You bring new life to Old Grove, he said, his cloudy eyes twinkling. Good for village. Young people, they leave. Athens. America. Village needs new blood. His words, simple as they were, felt like a final key turning in a long-locked door. From that day on, the village embraced me with open arms. Invitations followed to name-day feasts, beach picnics, even the summer festival committee. Each gathering wove another thread into the web of connection, keeping me anchored. Yana, the weaver whose stall stood beside ours at the weekly market, became a close friend. In her early 40s, widowed young, she had a sharp wit and a no-nonsense wisdom that reminded me of my old college roommate. Our conversations, half in her excellent English, half in my slowly growing Greek, covered everything from olive prices to village gossip. One afternoon, as we packed up unsold goods, she turned to me with a piercing question. You never speak of America, she said softly. Family there, friends? The words hit like a pebble dropped into a still pool. I hesitated. My parents died years ago, I replied, voice quieter than I expected. I had friends, but I trailed off. In truth, I had begun burying those parts of my life. Ethan had chipped away at my network, always with a smile. My friends were draining, or jealous, or not good for us, and so gradually I had let them go. Yana nodded knowingly. The husband, she said, the one who left you in Italy. I hadn't spoken his name in months. Ethan, I said quietly. The syllables felt strange on my tongue. His name was Ethan. He never came looking for me. Her honesty was a jolt after months of gentle avoidance from Irene and Marco. I don't know, I added truthfully. I haven't checked my email or messages. I didn't want to know. Yana raised a single eyebrow. Maybe, time to look. Not for him, for you. To close the door properly. That evening, after helping Irene knead dough for tomorrow's bread, I retreated to my room. I plugged in my old phone, With a deep breath I connected to the farmhouse's modest Wi-Fi. The notifications came instantly, hundreds of emails. Many were junk, but sprinkled throughout were names I hadn't seen in a long time. Old friends, former clients. Their subject lines had shifted from cheerful greetings to concern to silence. Shame crept up my spine. I had vanished from their lives as completely as I had from Ethan's. Then one thread caught my eye. Emails from my former design mentor. Job opportunity, follow-up, final chance. She'd recommended me for a remote consulting role with a sustainable building materials firm. The last message had been sent just 2 weeks ago. The position was still open, if I was interested. I hadn't even processed the possibility before another email made my heart stop. From Ethan Blake, subject. I know where you are. It had arrived just hours earlier. Fingers trembling I opened Anna. It's taken months, and a private investigator, but I've finally tracked you to that backwater village in Greece. This has gone on long enough. I'm coming to bring you home and end this ridiculous tantrum. My flight lands in Athens on Thursday. Be ready. 3 days. The words swirled in front of me, rage, fear, disbelief, all battling in my chest. After all this time, after the silence, after leaving me stranded, he expected to just pick me up. Like forgotten luggage, I stumbled downstairs, phone in hand. Irene looked up from the ledger, immediately reading my face. Bad news, from America, she asked gently. Ethan, I managed, he's coming, Thursday. She didn't blink. Instead, she reached beneath the ledger and pulled out an envelope. I waited for right moment, she said, sliding it across the table. Inside were legal papers, my name alongside Irene's and Marco's. A formal partnership agreement, in Greek and English. 1/3 business, Irene said. Years now, not future, now. Tears filled my eyes. This wasn't charity, this was a foundation, a home, a life. You choose what happens Thursday, Irene said, tapping the document gently. You have home here, business, friends. She looked at the phone in my hand. That man, he no longer decides. Her words wrapped around me like armor. For the first time since that afternoon in Cortona, I wasn't just surviving, I was rooted, steady, ready. The next 3 days passed in a blur, but not of packing. Instead, I prepared my future. I visited Katerina, the village's only lawyer. We drafted divorce papers in both Greek and English. I wrote back to my design mentor, expressing interest in the consulting role. I emailed the friends I had abandoned. No excuses, just honest. On Thursday, under a cloudless summer sky, I was in the processing shed with Marco, testing olive oil samples, when I heard the low rumble of a rental car. Irene appeared at the door, her face unreadable. He is here. My heart thudded, but my feet moved with certainty. Wiping my hands on my apron, I stepped outside. There he was, Ethan, leaning against a sleek silver sedan, designer sunglasses, perfect hair. He looked out of place, sterile and polished, amid the olive trees and stone walls. He didn't see me at first, giving me a moment to collect myself. The man who once consumed my world now looked smaller, less important. Ethan, I called. He turned, startled. His eyes scanned me, my sun-browned arms, loose linen clothes, bare face. What happened to you? He asked, his voice edged with disbelief. Life, I said calmly. It happened. He opened his arms like a practiced actor. I've come to take you home. Enough of this drama. This isn't drama, I replied. This is my life, my choice. He frowned, glancing behind me at Irene and Marco, who stood in the doorway silently watching. Are they holding you here? They're teaching me, I said, about farming, about kindness, about freedom. I'm a partner now. A partner, he repeated with a hollow laugh. Come on, Hannah. You're not a farmer, you're a designer. This is your eat, pray, love phase, and I'm here to take you back. I reached into my pocket and handed him the divorce papers. He stared down at them, stunned. You're serious? Yes, I said softly. You left me in Italy, but I found my way, and I'm not going back. His voice dropped to a warning growl. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather regret something I chose than live with regret someone else chose for me. Marco stepped forward then, placing a hand on my shoulder. He looked Ethan dead in the eye and spoke calmly in Greek. What did he say? Ethan asked warily. He said the road to Athens is long. You should leave now to reach it before dark. Ethan's face darkened. He said nothing more. He turned, climbed into the car and drove away, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. I exhaled. Irene slipped her hand into mine. We turned back toward the farmhouse. My house too now. The oil needed bottling. Dinner needed preparing. The market inventory wasn't going to sort itself. The man who once tried to break me had, by accident, given me the greatest gift of all. A life of my own. Ethan, I called, my voice steady, calmer than I expected. He turned. The shock on his face was almost comical. His eyes swept over me, from my worn work boots, to my sun-darkened arms, pausing at the loose hair I'd tucked under a cotton scarf. I watched recognition wrestle with disbelief. My God, Hannah, what happened to you? That familiar tone, laced with disapproval and control, once would have sent me scrambling to fix myself, to be what he wanted. Now it washed over me like sea spray hitting a rock. Life happened, I said, taking a slow step forward. What are you doing here, Eth? He slipped off his sunglasses, that practiced charm sliding into place like a mask. I've come to take you home. Of course, this has gone on long enough. Don't you think? I held my ground. This isn't about making a point, I said, cutting him off before he could rehearse his line. It's about making a life. His smile faltered. Behind me I heard the soft steps of Irene and Marco emerging from the farmhouse. They didn't speak, but positioned themselves quietly behind me, guardians in silence. Ethan noticed. His gaze sharpened. These the people you've been with. What are they keeping you here? They're teaching me, I said evenly. About olive farming, about community, about kindness without strings. I gestured toward the groves. I'm not just passing through. I'm part owner now. I have a business. Disbelief crossed his face, followed like clockwork by the condescension I knew too well. A business, Hannah. Be serious. You're a designer. This is some eat, pray, love fantasy. You needed space. You've had it. Let's go. He smiled again, like it was set. I admit leaving you in Italy was a mistake. A stupid drunk mistake. I've apologized. Now let's move on. You've apologized, I echoed, raising my brows. In what universe does ghosting me for months, then showing up uninvited, demanding I return count as an apology? His jaw tightened, the charm cracked. Fine. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have left you. Is that what you want? Can we move past this now? Why did you even look for me, Ethan? I asked. It's been 6 months. Why now? He shifted, glancing at Irene and Marco, discomfort breaking through. Can we at least talk in the car? They don't need to speak English to know what's happening, I said. So answer me. Why now? He hesitated, then exhaled. Your parents were calling. Our friends were asking questions. Clients, wondering why you weren't at events. At the house. It's starting to look bad for your image, I finished. He corrected me sharply. Our image, our life, 10 years of it, built together. No, I said softly, you built it. I just lived in it. He scoffed. You had a good life, Hannah, a beautiful home, financial security, status. What more could you want? I didn't flinch. Purpose, autonomy, real connection, and I found all three right here. I gestured toward the simple stone house behind me. Here, in a place you called backward and beneath me. This isn't you, he snapped. The Hannah I know doesn't choose sweat and blisters over silk and champagne. You're right, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. That Hannah died in Italy, the one who begged you not to leave. Irene stepped forward then, pressing something into my hand. The partnership contract. Though she didn't understand the language, she felt the moment. I unfolded it and held it out. I'm not a guest here, Ethan. I'm a partner. I have responsibility to people who value me, not for how I look or who I know, but for what I bring. His face reddened. This is ridiculous. Whatever game this is, it's not a game, I said, reaching into my pocket. I held out the envelope Katerina had prepared. These are divorce papers already filed, with terms. He stared at them as if I'd handed him a live wire. You can't be serious. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm choosing something better, something real. I stepped forward and placed the envelope in his stiff hand. You left me, laughed. You never expected I'd survive, let alone thrive. But I did. Without you. His fingers curled around the papers, his eyes flickering between wounded pride and disbelief. You'll regret this, he said. But even he didn't sound convinced. When you're 60 and still hauling olives, you'll remember what you gave up. Maybe, I said quietly, but I'd rather live with the risk of my own choices than the certainty of someone else's. Marco stepped beside me then, resting a firm hand on my shoulder. He said something in Greek, calm, clear, final. Ethan blinked. What did he say? He asked, his voice suddenly small. He said the road to Athens is long. I translated, you should leave now to make it before dark. Ethan looked between us. At me, at the house, at the field. Finally he saw what I already knew. This wasn't a negotiation, and I didn't belong to him anymore. It was goodbye. Without another word he turned, climbed into the car and drove away. The dust from his tires settled over the dirt road, and with it the last remnants of the life I had once thought was all I could ever have. Irene slipped her hand into mine. Together the three of us turned back toward the house. My house now too. The evening's work waited. Oil to bottle, bread to bake, and tomorrow's market inventory to finish. Once Ethan abandoned me, thinking I'd crawl back, but instead I found roots. I found strength. I found myself. Sometimes the cruelest endings open the doors to the kindest beginnings. Ethan tried to break me, but all he did was set me free.